The first sign was not light, but silence. A sudden, crushing stillness that fell over the void above Holy Terror, as if the universe itself drew breath and forgot how to exhale. Astropaths screamed in unison across the segmentum solar, their minds flayed by a pressure they could not name, while aboard the watchful bastions of the Imperial Navy, machine spirits growled warnings no lex mechanic could decipher. Something had begun to tear through the Imperium, not as a vessel, not as a demon, but as a wound carved by a force older and more primal than even the warp's shifting madness. The rift blossomed like a rupture in the membrane of reality, a crack of blinding white that pulsed with a violent heartbeat. Geller fields trembled at its presence, and the massive defense stations orbiting Terra groaned as their sacred hulls strained. From the widening breach came a roar, impossibly physical, echoing across the void like the bellow of some ancient titan forced through a realm not meant to hold it. And then a figure fell from the aperture, a body hurled across dimensions, trailing embers of dying universes still clinging to his scarred skin. Kratos struck the void as a meteor of flesh and fury, his descent slowed only by the artificial gravity wells of the orbiting battlements. The Spartan's body twisted as he regained consciousness mid-fall, his hands instinctively reaching for searing chains that were no longer bound to his forearms. The cold of the void bit into him, yet he did not suffocate. Old divine blood still coursed through his veins, granting him endurance beyond mortal measure, though even he felt the oppressive weight of this new cosmos pressing against him like judgment. Alarms wailed across the adamantine spear station as tracking arrays locked onto the intruder. Battle psalms echoed through its steel corridors as thousands of Imperial Navy personnel took their stations. Servitors interfaced with gun batteries, and targeting runes painted the drifting warrior with lethal certainty. To the Imperium, nothing descending from the warp was benign. Everything was a threat until it was ash, and even then its ashes were suspect. Kratos felt the gaze of countless weapons turn toward him. He spun, bracing his feet against the invisible drag of the void, and watched the looming shape of the fortress station grow clearer, vast, brutal, uninviting. It reminded him of the temples of Olympus after the fall, cold and wounded, yet clinging stubbornly to power. But this world, this realm, pulsed with a different essence, neither divine nor mortal. It was drenched in pain, saturated with the screams of a billion souls, being crushed beneath the weight of an empire held together by faith and fear. Bolter fire erupted. The rounds streaked through the darkness, explosive shells that tore through the vacuum without sound. Kratos' instinct surged, his body twisted, shifting into a defensive stance, though he possessed no blades, no axe, no shield. Only the iron of his will and the memory of unending war. The shells struck him, explosions flaring across his skin, hurling him backward in bursts of light. He gritted his teeth, fury rising not from pain, though he felt it, but from the senselessness of yet another world greeting him with fear, mistrust, and violence. The barrage continued until a voice thundered across the Voxnet, halting the firestorm. Cease fire, secure the intruder, do not destroy. The order carried authority carved from centuries of command. Kratos drifted closer to the station's docking shield, his body scorched but unbroken, his eyes burning with a mixture of confusion and gathering wrath. A magnetic tether shot forth, ensnaring him with a crackle of energy that constricted around his limbs like spectral chains. He struggled, pulling against the force, but the tether tightened, and the vacuum around him pulsed with destabilizing energy that gnawed at even his divine resilience. He allowed his muscles to relax, not in surrender, but in calculated stillness. He had been bound before, by gods, by fate, by his own sins. This was merely another shackle, temporary and unworthy of panic. As he was dragged toward the docking void lock, he glimpsed the planet below, a monstrous world of endless spires, cyclopean cathedrals, oceans of metal, and a radiant auric glow at its heart that pierced even the darkness of space. Terror. He did not know its name, yet he felt the weight of its legacy, a world drowning in fervor and legend. Something within that golden radiance stirred a deep, ancient tremor in his soul, a sense of being measured by an unseen, silent force. The void lock sealed, atmosphere rushed back in, and gravity yanked him to the steel decking. He landed on one knee, the floor trembling beneath the impact. Around him stood armored soldiers encased in carapace armor, their weapons trained upon him, their expressions hidden behind grim visors. He rose slowly, thick cords of muscle tightening beneath war-worn skin, and the soldiers instinctively took a cautious step back. Kratos observed them without malice, though his voice, when he spoke, rumbled like an avalanche. "Where am I?" No one answered. Instead, a squad leader approached, his voice disciplined but strained. "You will come with us. You will face judgment for your emergence from the warp." The word warp stirred nothing familiar in Kratos, but judgment was a language he knew intimately. Without resistance, he allowed them to bind his wrists with energized restraints. They sparked against his skin, struggling to contain him, but he remained still. As he was escorted through the steel corridors of the station, whispers followed him, soldiers murmuring about his size, his scars, the impossible readings from the scans. Some saw a weapon, some saw a threat beyond comprehension, others saw an omen of doom. Kratos felt none of their fear. He felt something far more troubling. The faint echo of a presence he could not name, distant, immense, watching. A presence that had gazed upon him the moment he fell through the rift. As the doors to the interrogation chamber sealed shut behind him, he understood one thing clearly. Whatever force had brought him here had done so with intent, and the path ahead would be carved in blood and consequence. And somewhere beyond those walls, the unseen gaze lingered still. The chamber into which Kratos was delivered felt less like a room and more like a coffin fashioned from iron scripture. Its walls were etched with layered wards, each one glowing faintly as if whispering prayers meant to restrain whatever abomination might be dragged inside. The restraints binding his wrists pulsed in response, feeding on the sanctified symbols, tightening with every movement he made. He did not fight them. He simply stood in the center of the cold floor, shoulders broad and unbowed, eyes fixed on the figures assembling before him. Interrogators entered first, inquisitorial adepts clothed in flowing crimson robes, each bearing a data slate and a series of rune-sealed devices designed to read, dissect, and restrain the wills of lesser beings. Behind them marched two custodians, their golden armor gleaming like fragments of a fallen sun. Their presence shifted the air with a palpable authority, and even the adepts walked more carefully in their radiance. Kratos studied these towering warriors, sensing in them a discipline and power not unlike the guardians of old realms he had once defied. One of the adepts activated a hovering field lumen, casting a harsh white glow across Kratos' face. "You emerge from a warp rift above Holy Terror," the man said, voice trembling with a mix of fear and fascination. "Such events do not occur without catastrophic consequence." He circled Kratos as though examining a relic dredged from some lost epoch. "State your name." Kratos remained silent, not out of defiance, but because he did not yet know how this world would shape his words. The adept frowned and gestured to a servo skull, which drifted forward, projecting a lattice of scanning light over the Spartan's body. The machine sputtered as it reached his scars, its sensors distorting as though rejecting the memory of each wound. When the scan reached the faint embers of divinity still lingering in his blood, its optics flared violently, and the device fell to the floor in a shower of sparks. A murmur rippled through the adepts. The custodians did not shift, but the faint tightening of their grips on their guardian spears told Kratos they were prepared for violence the moment it became necessary. "I asked for your name," the adept repeated, more forcefully this time. "Kratos," he said at last, the single word echoing off the reinforced walls like the toll of a distant war drum. The name carried weight, carved from years of blood and rebellion, and even in this foreign realm, its resonance drew uneasy glances. "And your origin?" another adept asked. Kratos lifted his eyes, the red marks upon his skin casting faint shadows beneath the luminance. "Not of this world, not of this warp." He spoke the final word as though testing it, feeling its strange texture upon his tongue. The adepts exchanged looks of alarm. "He admits extra-dimensional displacement," one whispered. "This aligns with the astropathic rupture. If he is no demon, his nature must still be classified as unknown and exceedingly dangerous." A deeper voice entered the chamber, "And yet he does not bear the stench of the great enemy." The custodian who spoke stepped forward, his armor humming with restrained power. Up close, Kratos could sense the immense force coiled within the warrior's frame, like a sun caged behind steel. The custodian studied him with eyes sharpened by centuries of service beneath a golden throne. "You are not warp spawn," he said. "You are something else, something without classification." Kratos met the warrior's gaze without hesitation. "I was pulled here," he said, "against my will, through a wound in the sky." At that, the chamber felt colder. The adepts stiffened, as though his words brushed against a forbidden truth. The custodian nodded slightly, acknowledging the echo of the event they had witnessed. "Your arrival caused disruption in the Imperium. A wound such as that does not open by chance." Before any of them could speak further, the chamber's vox emitter crackled to life, the voice that emerged sharp and commanding. "Bring the prisoner to the transit vault. The High Lords will pass judgment." The adepts bowed, the custodians inclined their heads, and the restraints around Kratos tightened, as if sensing the change in destination. He allowed himself to be guided, though the corridor ahead promised nothing of safety. As they escorted him through the labyrinthine passages of the station, he felt the walls pulse with life, machine spirits whispering hymns beneath their metallic breaths. Every step carried the scent of incense mingled with the tang of ionized metal, a strange marriage of devotion and war. Soldiers and servitors lined the path, staring as the chained warrior passed. Some looked afraid, others curious, and a few carried expressions of grim expectancy, as though believing that the universe had finally sent them the herald of some long-dreaded prophecy. Kratos ignored their stares. His thoughts lingered on the unseen force he had sensed earlier, the silent gaze that bore into him the moment he entered this realm. It lingered still, like the breath of a god that refused to reveal itself. He had battled deities, slain them, defied them, but this presence was different. Vast, distant, ancient beyond measure. Watching. The custodian beside him spoke quietly, just loud enough for Kratos to hear. "Take care when you stand before the High Lords. They fear what they do not understand, and they understand nothing of you. fear. The word meant little to Kratos, yet he recognized it in others with ease. The Imperium lived drowning in it. Fear of heresy, fear of corruption, fear of the warp's endless hunger. This realm clung to survival by faith alone, and faith was a fragile shield. They reached the transit vault, a massive chamber whose gates rose like the jaws of some metallic leviathan. Beyond it, a shuttle waited to ferry them to Terra's surface. Kratos looked upon the towering doors, upon the gilded symbols etched into their surface, upon the weight of expectation hanging over every moment. He did not know this world, but this world intended to judge him. As the vault doors began to open, flooding the platform with golden light from the waiting craft, Kratos felt the unseen presence stir once more, silent, immense, unyielding. And far below, on the cradle world of humanity, something waited for him with purpose. The shuttle descended through Terra's atmosphere like a relic carved from war itself, its hull reverberating with engine hymns sung by machine spirits older than most civilizations. Kratos sat secured by restraints that hummed with psychic wards, their sharp pulses gnawing against his skin, yet none of them fully succeeded in suppressing the heat coiling within his blood. Across from him stood the two custodians, unmoving, vigilant, their golden armor catching the dim light of the cabin as though holding fragments of a forgotten dawn. No words passed between them. They watched him with the calm intensity of beings accustomed to safeguarding an empire founded upon sacrifice. As the craft pierced through the smog-wreathed skies, the vast sprawl of terror unfolded beneath them. Towering cathedrals rose like petrified mountains. Endless oceans of habitation blocks stretched beyond the horizon. Rivers of pilgrims wound through avenues lit by burning braziers, their chants rising like a continuous tide of pleading devotion. Kratos studied the world with measured eyes. It felt ancient, not in the way Greece or Midgard had once felt old, but in the way a graveyard felt ancient, a place layered by countless deaths. The shuttle shuddered as it docked at the Imperial Palace precinct. When the hatch opened, a gust of hot air rushed in, scented with incense, oil, and the metallic tang of blood from 1,000 ritual offerings. The landing platform was lined with custodians, their presence a golden phalanx radiating unforgiving judgment. Kratos was guided forward, the restraints tugging at him with each motion. He did not resist, though the urge to tear them apart pulsed beneath his skin. Violence, however, would serve no purpose here. Not yet. They led him into the palace, its halls so vast that even mountains would seem small beside them. Every wall bore carvings of war, triumph, and martyrdom. Statues of armored giants towered above him, their stone visages frozen in eternal vigilance. Kratos felt the magnitude of the place press upon him. This was no seat of mortal governance. It was the heart of a civilization locked in unending struggle, held together by reverence for a ruler who no longer spoke. At last they arrived at the Hall of the High Lords. Its gates, wrought from layers of adamantine and blessed gold, opened with a slow, ponderous groan. Within, shadows danced beneath the illumination of sacred torches, revealing 13 thrones arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a figure draped in robes signifying authority and burden. Their eyes fixed upon Kratos as the custodians escorted him to the center of the hall, the place reserved for the condemned, the judged, or the yet-to-be understood. One of the lords, a figure clad in thick crimson vestments, leaned forward. "You stand before the ruling council of the Imperium of Man. You emerged from the warp above Terra. This alone is enough to warrant execution." His voice carried the weight of centuries of bureaucracy sharpened into cruelty. Another lord, older, her face etched with the strain of endless responsibility, studied him with colder scrutiny. State your nature. Are you demon? Xenos? Abomination crafted by the ruinous powers? Kratos met their gazes with unyielding calm. I am none of those things. I am Kratos of Sparta. I was pulled into your realm against my will. A murmur rippled across the chamber. Some lords scoffed. Others leaned forward with interest. One, cloaked in austere black and bearing the sigil of the Inquisition, lowered his hood. No mortal survives transit through the warp unshielded. No mortal arrives without corruption. His eyes narrowed. So either you are lying, or you are something more dangerous. Kratos' voice remained steady. Where I come from, I have fought gods, slain them. I have walked between realms not unlike your warp. I have endured what no mortal should. Silence fell like a hammer. The High Lord's expressions shifted, from dismissal to unease. Even the custodians reacted, the slightest tilt of their heads betraying intrigue. The Inquisitor rose from his throne, stepping down the polished steps with slow deliberation. His presence felt heavy, as though wrapped in invisible chains of authority. He circled Kratos with the measured grace of a predator. You speak of godhood lightly. I speak of truth, Kratos replied. And truth, the Inquisitor said softly, is the most dangerous weapon in this galaxy. Another lord, her armor adorned with purity seals, interjected. If he is a weapon sent by chaos, we must destroy him before the enemy commands him. Yet a different voice spoke, calm and resolute. It belonged to a tech priest whose body gleamed with augmetics. Our instruments detected no signs of warp taint. His physiology defies classification. His potential energy output exceeds theoretical limits. Such power could serve the Imperium. That same power, the Inquisitor countered, could destroy it. Kratos felt the tension of their debate coil around him like a tightening rope. These leaders, though powerful, operated from fear. Fear of collapse, fear of corruption, fear of anything beyond their control. In their eyes, he was not a man, but a question that could topple an empire. The custodian who had escorted him stepped forward, breaking protocol. His voice reverberated through the hall. He is no demon. The Emperor's light would have burned him upon arrival if he were. His gaze turned slightly to Kratos. Yet his light stirred when you approached terror. The words fell into the chamber with the weight of prophecy. The High Lords exchanged looks layered with doubt and possibility. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, not in suspicion now, but in calculation. At last, the Lord Commander Militant spoke. Until further judgment is passed, the entity known as Kratos will be confined within the bastion of penitent iron. There he will be studied, interrogated, and tested. Kratos felt the restraints tighten, and the custodians prepared to escort him away. But before they moved, the Inquisitor spoke one final time, his voice low and foreboding. If you are what you claim, if you truly have slain gods, then know this realm contains horrors that devour gods as mere offerings. Kratos' eyes hardened. Then let them come. The chamber doors closed behind him with the sound of destiny taking shape. The bastion of penitent iron was less a prison and more a monument to suffering, carved deep into the bedrock beneath the imperial palace. Its corridors pulsed with low, mournful hymns sung by machine spirits bound to eternal vigilance. Kratos was led through its depths by a procession of custodians and silent servo monitors, their steps echoing against walls etched with the names of traitors, heretics, and beings whose titles had long since been erased from history. The deeper they descended, the more the air thickened with sanctified incense and the lingering residue of anguish. The restraint still bound his wrists, but he walked without hesitation. Each moment allowed him to understand more of this strange realm, its fear, its reverence, its unyielding devotion to a figure who ruled not by voice, but by the weight of his absence. Kratos had seen kingdoms ruled by tyrants, by gods, by prophecies, yet nothing matched the oppressive stillness that clung to every stone beneath the imperial palace, as though reality itself braced beneath the burden of a single will. The custodians halted before an armored gate adorned with massive golden sigils. Their leader spoke softly into a vox emitter, and the gate opened with agonizing slowness. Beyond lay a chamber unlike the others, vast and hollow, illuminated by shafts of pale light filtering from unseen apertures. In its center rested a transport cradle crafted from adamantine ribs and cables alive with psychic wards. The custodians positioned, Kratos within it, and the restraints were fastened to the cradle's interface points. "You will be taken before the golden throne," the lead custodian said, his voice a mixture of solemn duty and something like caution. Few are permitted this audience. Fewer still survive it. Kratos met the warrior's gaze with steady calm. Why bring me before a throne if its master does not speak? The custodian's expression remained unchanged. Silence is not weakness. His gaze alone unmakes falsehood. Before Kratos could answer, the cradle activated. A surge of energy flowed beneath him, cold and electric, and the chamber around him dissolved into swift descent. The cradle plunged through a vertical shaft lined with glowing sigils, moving with impossible speed, while the air sang with choral resonance. Kratos felt the vibrations in his bones, the hum of psychic presence brushing against his mind, like the probing tendrils of an unseen ocean. At last the cradle slowed, emerging into a cavernous hall so vast he could barely see its farthest walls. Golden structures arched overhead in sweeping patterns of divine engineering, each one carved with depictions of war, sacrifice, and celestial dominion. The air tasted of incense mixed with the metallic tang of ancient machinery, and beneath those scents lurked a deeper presence, immense, oppressive, eternal. Before him rose the dais, and upon it sat the golden throne. Kratos had faced gods of Olympus, had battled entities who commanded storms and fate, had walked the bloody path of divine rebellion. Yet nothing he had ever witnessed compared to the being enthroned before him. The emperor's form was encased in a labyrinth of life-sustaining machinery, wires and conduits woven like the roots of a cosmic tree. His body, though unmoving, radiated an aura so overpowering it felt as though the air itself bent around him. The cradle halted. A wave of silence passed across the hall. Even the custodians stationed along the perimeter bowed their heads. Kratos felt the presence like a spear point pressing against his spirit, not physical, not psychic alone, but something deeper. It penetrated memory, peeling back layers of his existence with meticulous precision. He felt moments from his past flicker before him. The burning streets of Sparta, the night he pledged himself to Ares, the chains searing into his flesh, the fires of Olympus, the frost-bitten ridges of Midgard. He felt the weight of his sins, his victories, his countless transformations. The Emperor saw all. A tremor stirred within Kratos' chest, something he had not felt in ages, a sensation bordering on vulnerability. The gaze did not speak. It did not judge with words. It simply was. A light without warmth, a force without mercy. The Emperor was a god, yet not like those Kratos had slain. He did not revel in worship nor tyranny. His will existed not for himself, but for a humanity clinging to survival with bloodied fingers. Kratos sensed the Emperor probing deeper, examining the remnants of divinity woven through his being, the echoes of pantheons long destroyed. For a fleeting moment, he glimpsed a spark of recognition, not of identity, but of purpose. Two beings shaped by war, by sacrifice, by the burden of worlds they could not abandon. A shift in the air broke the stillness. The Emperor's psychic presence surged, enveloping Kratos entirely. It was not an attack, it was a revelation. Kratos saw visions, burning stars devoured by the warp, legions of demons rising like storms, human worlds screaming beneath the assault of horrors that twisted flesh and soul alike. And then another vision, himself, not chained, not judged, but leading armies across broken worlds, his wrath turned outward, his strength used not to destroy creation, but to hold its last fragments together. The vision dissolved, leaving him breathless. The psychic presence withdrew, though its imprint remained like a smouldering brand upon his mind. The cradle's restraints shuddered, releasing tension. The custodians approached cautiously, as though unsure what the Emperor had seen. One of them spoke, voice hushed with awe. "You still stand. Few who feel his scrutiny remain whole." Kratos looked once more at the unmoving figure upon the throne. Though the Emperor did not speak, Kratos felt a command settle upon him. Not voiced, not ordered, but understood. He was not brought here to be judged. He had been brought here to be chosen. The custodians prepared to escort him away, but as Kratos turned, he felt the Emperor's gaze linger on his back, like a weight he would now carry forever. He understood then that whatever path lay before him was no accident of fate. Something in this realm had summoned him, not to punish, but to test. As the cradle began its ascent from the throne's chamber, Kratos knew the trial had only begun, and the next step would demand more than strength. It would demand purpose. The cradle ascended from the depths of the throne's chamber with a slow, deliberate hum, carrying Kratos toward a world that felt subtly altered, not in sight or sound, but in the weight that now pressed against his spirit. The Emperor's silent gaze lingered within him like a smouldering ember, reshaping thought, sharpening instinct, awakening a dormant sense of purpose that had not stirred since the last echoes of Ragnarok faded. The custodians sensed the change as well. Their movements grew more measured, their vigilance sharpened not from fear, but from recognition. Something had passed between the Emperor and Kratos, something none of them were permitted to witness. When the cradle reached the bastion's entry platform, the restraints detached with a hiss of cooling metal. Kratos stepped onto the stone, his wrists free for the first time since his arrival. Yet no warrior raised a weapon, no adept cried warning. The custodians merely exchanged silent glances before one addressed him. "You will be transferred to an Astra Militarum battle group deploying to the front," he said. "The High Lords believe your purpose may be revealed in battle." Kratos considered the words. "You test me with war." It was not a question. "It is the only language the Imperium trusts," the custodian replied. They escorted him out of the bastion and into the palace's outer precincts. Massive gates parted before them, revealing a landing field crowded with transports, servitors, vox officers, and priestly figures chanting blessings into the hulls of departing craft. The sky above churned with ash-grey clouds, illuminated by the fiery trails of ships leaving Terra for distant battlefields. Kratos inhaled the harsh scents of incense, burning fuel, and the iron tang of blood, an aroma of unending conflict that reminded him of realms he had hoped never to walk again. A dropship awaited him, its hull bearing the sigil of the 998th Solar Cohort. Soldiers in flak armor stood in formation, their faces hardened by exhaustion and the acceptance of near-certain death. When they saw Kratos approach, their ranks faltered with confusion. They had expected a prisoner, perhaps a demon. They had not expected a figure carved from war itself, moving with silent, measured intent. The officer in command, a woman with scars etched across her cheek and eyes that had seen too many worlds burn, stepped forward. "Designation?" she asked, her voice steady, though her grip on her rifle tightened. "Kratos," he answered. "Orders state you are to accompany our regiment into the meat grinder," she replied, glancing at the custodians for confirmation. When they nodded, she turned back to him. "We don't know what you are, but if you're breathing after an audience with the Emperor, then you're more than any of us. Follow my commands, kill the enemy, and don't turn on my soldiers." Kratos studied her expression. Iron resolve beneath the fatigue. He respected it. "I follow no tyrant," he said, "but I know battle, and I will bring death to those who threaten your people." She accepted this with a curt nod, then bored. Inside the dropship, soldiers avoided sitting near him, though they watched him with furtive glances. Some whispered prayers, others stared in awe. Kratos ignored them, his attention focused on the shifting weight within himself. The Emperor's vision had carved into him an image of the galaxy's decay, of horrors spreading like a plague through stars. Rage stirred, not the blind fury that once consumed him, but a controlled fire ignited by injustice and suffering. He had once sworn never again to be a pawn of gods, yet he could not ignore what he had seen. This realm was drowning. The dropship lurched upward, engines roaring as it ascended into the void. Through the viewport, terror shrank into a sphere of golden light and shadowed continents before vanishing into the darkness of space. Hours, or perhaps days, for Kratos, did not measure time as mortals did, passed before the vessel shuddered with warp entry preparation. The soldiers tightened their harnesses, murmuring chants meant to ward off madness. A priest walked the aisle, sprinkling sanctified oil and whispering rites. Kratos watched in silence. The concept of fleeing from the storm held no meaning for him. When the warp engines screamed to life, reality warped around them. Kratos felt the pressure of the Imperium pressing against the hull, like 1,000 whispering mouths brushing against the edge of his mind. But unlike the mortals around him, who clenched their teeth, eyes squeezed shut, Kratos felt only the distant echo of something old, hungry, and eager to taste the essence of a being it did not understand. He snarled softly. The presence recoiled. When the dropship finally broke free of the warp, alarms blared. A war zone sprawled below, a shattered world split by trenches, burning manufactorums, and skies filled with streaks of artillery fire. Vox chatter crackled through the cabin as officers barked orders. Demon incursions confirmed in the eastern trench line. "We've lost contact with the 45th. Hold formation for insertion zone." The officer approached Kratos. "This world is Skalathrax's shadow incursion front. The World Eaters are here. Demons too. Keep your head and you might live." Kratos rose, his muscles coiling with readiness. "War is not new to me." The dropship door burst open mid-descent, wind howling in. The battlefield's heat slammed into them, blood, fire, and the stench of warp corruption carried by a storm that turned the air crimson. Below, thousands of guardsmen fought desperately against horned monstrosities and frenzied traitor marines whose roars pierced the storm. The officer shouted, Drop. Kratos stepped into the maw of war. He landed with earth-splitting force, soldiers crashing down around him. A demon lunged, its blade-like limbs dripping warp flame. But Kratos seized it mid-strike, crushing its skull with a single blow. Its essence dissolved into shrieking vapor. The soldiers stared in disbelief before rallying behind him. The ground trembled. A massive figure in blood-red armor charged through the smoke, chain axe roaring. A world-eater berserker, its eyes glowing with rabid slaughterlust, bellowed a challenge. Kratos met its charge head-on, seizing the whirring weapon and tearing it free with brutal precision. Sparks exploded as their blows collided, strength against strength, fury against purpose. The berserker howled, recognizing a worthy foe. Kratos answered with silence, an overwhelming force. The chapter ends as their weapons clash again, the battlefield around them erupting into chaos, and Kratos steps fully into the crucible that will shape the Imperium's destiny. The berserker's next charge came with the fury of a falling star, its chain axe shrieking as though eager to taste mortal flesh. Kratos caught the weapon, mid-swing, sparks bursting between their grips. The traitor marine's strength was immense, but not unfamiliar. Kratos had wrestled gods from their thrones, torn titans from the sky, and broken the will of monsters born from prophecy. The berserker pushed harder, froth spilling from the rents in his helmet grill, his roar echoing across the blood-soaked plain. Kratos twisted, wrenching the axe free before driving his knee into the warrior's chest plate. The ceramite dented inward. The giant stumbled, but did not fall. These warriors were built for slaughter, carved from hatred so old it might as well have been religion. The ground trembled. Another roar joined the first. More berserkers emerged from the smoke, red armor glowing in the hellish light of warp fire. Behind them, shapes stirred, demonic silhouettes, tall and lithe, their blades shimmering like molten metal. The soldiers of the solar cohort faltered at the sight, their lines bending beneath the weight of terror. Kratos could feel their fear ripple through the battlefield like a cold wind. The first berserker lunged again. Kratos met him with brutal precision, seizing the chain axe by its spinning teeth and swinging it in a sharp arc. The weapon whined in protest, sparks erupting as Kratos forced the traitor's arms back toward his own armor. The berserker howled, struggling wildly, until the blades carved into his chest. The shriek ended abruptly. The marine fell, lifeless. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to pause. Then everything erupted at once. The demons surged forward, their voices a cacophony of laughter and shrill keening. The berserkers roared their devotion to the blood god, charging with unstoppable momentum. Bolter rounds screamed through the air. Krieg guardsmen fired their rifles in disciplined volleys, shells detonating against demon flesh that refused to remain solid. Officers shouted orders drowned by the roar of artillery striking distant manufactorums that belched fire into the sky. Kratos moved into the heart of the onslaught, each step carving a wake through the chaos. A demon leapt toward him, its maw splitting into 3 jagged jaws. But Kratos caught it by its elongated skull and crushed it into the earth. Another swung a blade wreathed in warp flame. Kratos tore free a broken iron beam from the ground and parried the strike, forcing the demon back before cleaving it in two. Their bodies evaporated into vapor, their essence howling as it was pulled screaming into the immaterial. The officer who had commanded the dropship stumbled near him, firing her laser gun until its charge pack glowed. "They're pushing us toward the forge," she shouted. "We hold or we die." Kratos followed her gaze. Beyond the smoke and collapsing trench lines rose a monstrous silhouette, a towering structure of brass and bone, fused with engines belching crimson steam. The demon forge of Scalathrax. War machines stalked around its base, their limbs jointed in unnatural angles, while rivers of molten metal flowed from wound-like openings. The air shimmered with the heat of creation and suffering combined. The berserkers were driving all resistance toward that place, a killing ground, a ritual. Another wave of traitor marines sprinted from the forge, chain blades revving, their laughter echoing across the field. Kratos stepped forward to meet them, but the ground near him suddenly ruptured. A massive taloned limb clawed its way out, followed by a towering demon bearing the icon of Khorne burned into its flesh. Its horned head rose high above the battlefield, its eyes twin furnaces of hatred. Soldiers fled at the sight, their discipline breaking. The demon studied Kratos with murderous hunger. "Godslayer," it hissed, voice rattling with layered tones. "The blood god desires your skull." Kratos tightened his fists. He may try. The demon charged, each step cracking the earth. Kratos rolled aside as his blade carved a trench where he had stood, molten stone bubbling at the strike's edge. He leapt onto the demon's arm, running up the limb as it struggled to shake him off. The creature swung wildly, its other claw slicing through the air. Kratos seized a jutting spike of bone on its shoulder and drove his fist into the demon's face. The strike sent a shockwave rippling outward, staggering the massive form. The demon roared, seizing him in its claw and hurling him across the battlefield. Kratos crashed into a mound of corpses and shattered debris. He rose as the demon advanced again, each footstep quaking the ground. Soldiers scrambled away, clearing the field by instinct alone. The beast lifted its blade to strike. Kratos hurled himself forward, catching the demon's wrist before the weapon could descend. Muscles bulged beneath his scarred skin. His feet dug into the bleeding earth. The demon snarled, pressing with overwhelming weight, but Kratos' fury surged like a tempest unleashed. With a roar that shook even the demons nearby, he twisted the creature's arm, snapping bone and sinew, then tore the limb free in a geyser of steaming ichor. The demon reeled back. Kratos drove the severed limb through its chest. Warp fire erupted in a violent plume as the creature disintegrated, its death scream echoing across the forge-lit sky. The remaining demons recoiled, their forms flickering as though the creature's destruction disrupted the ritual binding them. The solar cohort rallied with renewed desperation. Officers shouted for a counter-offensive. Artillery fire rained from the upper ridge, pushing the traitor marines back toward the forge. But Kratos did not join the retreating line. His gaze remained fixed on the monstrous structure ahead. He felt the pull of the place, a gravitational force that was not physical, but spiritual. Something inside the forge called to him, not with words, not with promises, but with hunger. The same hunger he had sensed in the warp when he crossed into this realm. The same hunger that had watched him in silence. The officer grabbed his arm. "We need to fall back. The forge is a death trap." Kratos did not move. "Then that is where I must go." Her eyes widened, but she saw something in his expression that silenced any protest. She released him. The battlefield raged behind him, but Kratos stepped toward the demon forge, drawn by the presence waiting within its burning heart. A presence that had recognized him. A presence eager to test the god-killer of another world. The path toward the demon forge twisted through trenches carved by artillery and strewn with the dead, their bodies half buried in ash and molten soil. Kratos moved through it with the steady purpose of a warrior who had seen battlefields far older than this world's memory. The heat radiating from the forge washed over him in waves, thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid burn of warp-tainted fumes. Each step closer intensified the strange pull he had felt, an awareness of eyes without form, studying him through the veil between reality and madness. Behind him, the solar cohort attempted to reform their lines. Officers' commands cracked through Vox systems, competing with the unending roar of chain blades and the thunder of artillery. Yet even as the fight raged, Kratos sensed their gazes following him, a mixture of fear and irrational hope. To them, he was neither ally nor enemy, but something caught between myth and uncertainty, an embodiment of violence unleashed in their defense, yet bound to no banner. A surge of warp light flared from the forge's central spire, casting the landscape into hellish relief. Demons shrieked from its balconies as the machinery within roared with renewed hunger. The earth trembled beneath a thudding cadence, and the sky crackled with lightning that writhed like serpents. Kratos pressed onward, unflinching, until a sudden explosion of dirt and fire erupted beside him. A squad of berserkers charged from the smoke, blades screaming, armor dripping with the ichor of their own reckless fury. The first swung low with a chain blade that spat sparks as it scraped across Kratos' bracer. He caught the weapon in one hand and struck the warrior's throat with the other, crushing ceramite and bone. The second Marine leapt at him, axe raised high, but Kratos stepped into the motion and drove the dead berserker's blade into his attacker's chest. The weapon lodged deep, and the Marine toppled, his roar cut short. The third circled warily, sensing Kratos' strength. For a heartbeat, the battlefield noise dulled, and the scent of burning metal thickened, mingling with the heavy musk of demon blood. The Marine charged with a guttural bellow, but Kratos ended it swiftly, wrenching free the chain blade and cleaving through the traitor's helm. The body fell, twitching, as warp flame guttered from the wound. Kratos wiped the blade clean against the earth, then cast it aside. The weapon vibrated with the maddened whispers of Khorne, and he wanted no part of its voice. Instead, he resumed his march toward the forge, feeling the war deepen around him. The structure's colossal gates pulsed with molten glow, each beat timed to the throb of a heart that was not truly alive. Before he reached the entrance, a tremor cut through the ground. Kratos halted, turning as a new force descended from the sky. Gunships streaked overhead, bearing the sigils of the Adeptus Custodes and the High Command. Their presence carved a path of dread through the battlefield. Even the demons recoiled, hissing as if scorched by invisible flame. The largest craft landed near Kratos, its ramp lowering with the hiss of sanctified hydraulics. From the shadows stepped figures encased in gleaming armor, custodians radiating the Emperor's will with every movement. At their center walked an Inquisitor, marked by a black seal etched with sigils of authority. His cloak billowed in the heat, revealing augmetic limbs and eyes polished to obsidian shine. "Stand down," the Inquisitor commanded. His voice carried through the war-torn air with the finality of a blade drawn across stone. "By decree of the High Lords, you will return under Imperial custody." Kratos regarded him with silent contempt. "I do not answer to your chains." The Inquisitor's expression did not change. "You were brought into our realm by means unknown. You walked from judgment still living only because the Emperor permits it. You will not defile his mercy by throwing yourself into a demon's forge like a mad beast." A custodian stepped forward to reinforce the words, spear angled in warning. "Retreat, Kratos. The forge is not your trial. It is a trap baited with your strength." Kratos felt the air stir behind him, as the forge exhaled a wave of heat that licked his back like a beast's breath. Yet the pull that had drawn him began to shift. No longer a beckoning hunger, but something colder. Watchful, measuring, waiting for a mistake. "I will not be commanded," Kratos answered, though his gaze flicked toward the forge with a warrior's instinct for danger. "But neither will I waste my strength on illusions." The Inquisitor approached until he stood barely an arm's length away. "Understand this, Godslayer. Your presence has changed the warp tides around Terra. Already there are murmurs, prophecies stirred, anomalous readings on our most sacred instruments. You walk unbound through the Imperium, and that makes you a threat. But the Emperor has not yet willed your destruction. That alone stays my hand." His voice sank to a near whisper. "Do not give me cause to question his silence." The words were delivered not as threat, but as unvarnished truth. Kratos felt the weight of them settle like a chain across his shoulders, not shackling him but anchoring him. He had seen what this realm faced: demons, traitors, the unending hunger of the warp. If he fell here to foolish impulse, he would serve the very forces he despised. Behind them, artillery thundered, and the solar cohort advanced again, emboldened by the arrival of the custodians. The forge's gates began to seal, crashing together with a final clang that echoed across the battlefield like the snapping of jaws denied their prey. Kratos exhaled slowly, the decision settling over him. He turned away from the forge. The Inquisitor nodded to the custodians. "Bind him only if he resists, otherwise escort him willingly." Kratos walked beside them without a word, not in surrender, but in acceptance of the path he now glimpsed forming ahead. Battle had revealed his strength. Now the Imperium sought to chain it, to shape it, to wield it. As they guided him back toward the landing craft, the officer from the solar cohort watched him from afar, her face streaked with soot and blood. She knew what he had done for her soldiers, and she saw what the Imperium intended to make of him. Kratos met her gaze for an instant, and in that silent exchange both understood a truth that neither custodian nor Inquisitor had spoken aloud. The Imperium did not wish to imprison him. It wished to claim him, for war, for survival, for destiny yet unwritten. The gunship bearing Kratos away from the battlefield cut through the smoke-choked sky with the solemn weight of inevitability, its engines groaning beneath layers of sanctified plating. Inside, the custodians stood in silent vigil, their golden armor dimmed by soot yet unblemished by doubt. The Inquisitor sat across from Kratos, black-robed and still, his augmetic eyes reflecting the faint strobing of warning lights as though cataloguing every motion of the man before him. Kratos felt none of their scrutiny. His thoughts lingered not on the forge or the slain demons, but on the faint tremor he had sensed when he turned away, something that had recoiled, yet not been defeated. The warp had noticed him. As the vessel ascended toward orbit, the hull shook with turbulence. A storm brewed in the void, a psychic pressure that crawled along the metal like frost. Servo skulls flickered, vox systems sputtered, and scripture-lit runes pulsed erratically. The custodians braced themselves, communicating in silent gestures. The Inquisitor merely closed his eyes, as though listening to something beyond mortal ears. The storm intensified. Shadows rippled across the cabin, though no light source shifted. Kratos felt the temperature drop, followed by a slow, coiling sensation, brushing the edges of his mind. It was not physical. It was thought without shape, hunger without form. He had felt such things only in the deepest magics of his old world, whispers from beings who dwelled beyond mortal comprehension. But this presence was not born from gods he had known. It was older, colder, bound to nothing but its own twisting designs. The Inquisitor's eyes snapped open. "Do not respond to it," he warned. Voice low. "It senses your strength. It tests the seams of your mind." Kratos did not answer. His jaw tightened as the presence pressed closer, brushing memories he had buried. It sifted through scenes of Sparta's ashes, Olympus burning, the death of his father, the frost-kissed forests of Midgard, the weight of blades he had carried across worlds. The presence lingered on each memory with serpentine curiosity. A whisper slithered through the air, though no tongue gave it voice. God-killer, wanderer, unmoored soul. Kratos' fist clenched. The custodians turned sharply toward him, sensing the shift. The whisper grew clearer, curling like smoke into thought. "You do not belong to them. You do not bow to dying thrones or broken empires. Your fate is not theirs to chain." Kratos growled beneath his breath, a sound that reverberated through the cabin. The Inquisitor rose immediately, placing a hand upon a glowing ward set into the wall. The sigil flared with blinding light, its radiance cutting through the shadows. The whisper recoiled but did not vanish. "War follows you across creation," it murmured, weaving itself around the glow. "And you follow war. You seek purpose, yet find only battle. Let me show you the path hidden from your sight." Kratos leaned forward, muscles coiled. "Be gone," he muttered, but the voice only laughed, soft and cold. "You are not their savior. You are their undoing." The lights flickered violently. A custodian stepped toward Kratos, spear raised, not to threaten him, but to shield him. Warp lightning danced along the hull, illuminating the cabin with jagged bursts of purple and blue. The ship lurched, alarms blaring. The Inquisitor slammed another ward rune, shouting over the storm. "It is Tzeentch's touch. Do not allow it to anchor itself within your mind." The presence pulsed with mirth. "Your mind is already a tapestry of wounds, Godslayer. I need only slip between the seams." Images flashed before Kratos' eyes. Terror burning, legions of demons pouring across shattered spires, a throne collapsing beneath golden fire, and Kratos himself, not fighting for humanity, but standing amidst ruin, crowned in the ashes of a dying galaxy. The whisper coiled tighter. "There are futures where you rise above them all. Realms where no emperor binds you, no god commands you, no fate chains you. You could shape the Imperium in your image, or burn it to embers and forge something truer." Kratos snarled, slamming a fist into the deck. The blow cracked the reinforced metal, breaking the psychic pressure for a heartbeat. The presence hissed, retreating slightly. The Inquisitor seized the opening. "Hold him steady," he barked to the custodians, who stepped closer, forming a half-circle around Kratos, their armor glowing with the Emperor's blessing. He pressed a sanctified relic to Kratos' chest, a small metal seal etched with arcane wards. It burned with radiant heat, searing not flesh, but the unseen thread binding Kratos to the whisper. The warp serpent recoiled sharply, its voice rising into a hiss. "You deny destiny. You deny the freedom I offer." Kratos lifted his head, eyes burning with a fury carved from grief, redemption, and defiance. "I deny you." The relic flared. The whisper shattered like glass. The warp storm outside howled one final time, then dissipated, leaving only silence. Kratos' breath steadied. The custodians lowered their weapons, though tension lingered in their posture. The Inquisitor exhaled slowly, regarding Kratos with a gaze no longer dominated by suspicion alone, but by something deeper. Wariness, yes, but also understanding. "You have resisted what has unmade entire worlds," he said. "But the warp now knows your name, and it will not cease its attempts." Kratos looked toward the stormless void beyond the viewport, feeling the faint echo of the whisper receding into darkness. "Let it try." The Inquisitor seated himself again, his voice quiet. "The High Lords believed you a threat. The Emperor saw something more. Now the warp itself seeks to claim you. Whether you wish it or not, your path intertwines with ours." Kratos did not respond. He stared into the void, feeling the crackling remnants of the whisper fade, yet knowing it would return with new guises, new temptations. Far ahead, the ship angled toward its next destination, a war zone waiting for a leader it did not yet know it would follow. The galaxy was beginning to move around him, and the warp serpent watched from the dark, patient and hungry. The journey through the void after the warp serpent's whisper felt heavier than any passage before. Not because of turbulence or threat, but because the silence inside the gunship had changed. The custodians watched Kratos not with suspicion now, but with the wary acknowledgement reserved for cataclysmic forces that could not be restrained, only directed. The Inquisitor, once rigid and measured, sat angled toward the viewport, deep in contemplation, though his mechanical eyes flickered toward Kratos with quiet calculation. The storm had marked them all. When the gunship's engines dimmed and the great viewing shutters parted, a new world appeared beneath them. A broken sphere of trenches, fortified bastions, burning cities, and distant mountain ridges lit by the flickering pulse of artillery fire. A war zone stretched so wide it seemed carved into the planet's very bones. Orbiting fleets hung in the void like rusted crowns, dispatching drop pods into the atmosphere without pause. The Vox system issued constant casualty reports, each one more dire than the last. "This is Vortax Gate," the Inquisitor said quietly. "A strategic choke point. 3 Crusade fleets are stalled here. If the line collapses, the sector falls." Kratos studied the surface. "And you send me there?" "Not as a weapon," the Inquisitor replied. "As a test, and perhaps as a fulcrum." The gunship plunged into the atmosphere, flames licking across the hull. The moment they broke through the cloud layer, the full scale of the war unfolded. Columns of guardsmen advancing under the roar of tank engines, colossal titans striding across the horizon like ancient gods reborn, and overhead, squadrons of Imperial fighters cutting through airborne daemons. The sky itself seemed at war, half torn by warp lightning, half suffocating beneath black smoke. The landing vector angled toward a command encampment surrounded by defensive bulwarks. When the gunship descended, banners of various regiments snapped violently in the wind. Cadia, Krieg, Katashan, Mordia, all gathered under a single crusade command. Officers ran between Vox towers, relaying rapidly shifting orders. Medicae units dragged wounded soldiers through mud that churned with blood. Priests walked among the dying, chanting litanies drowned by distant screams. When Kratos stepped from the ramp, conversation died. Soldiers stared, mouths half open, rifles wavering downward. None of them had ever seen a man built like him. Broad as a dreadnought's chassis, scarred like a battlefield, expression carved from stone, word spread with frightening speed. "That's him," whispered a trooper, "the one who tore apart a demon prince." "No," another murmured. "The custodians escorted him. He must be some lost Primarch." A third voice muttered, half in awe, half in fear, "Or the Emperor's retribution made flesh." Kratos ignored their voices. He looked only at the war before him. A towering figure emerged from the command tent. A Lord General, his greatcoat streaked with ash, medals dulled by exhaustion. His eye implant whirred as he inspected Kratos, then shifted to the custodians. "What have you brought me?" the general demanded. "A solution," the Inquisitor replied, stepping forward. The general scoffed. "I don't need myths. I need regiments, hundreds of thousands of bodies. The enemy outnumbers us 4-1. The enemy," the Inquisitor said, "fears him." There was no time for further argument. A deafening explosion tore through the eastern bulwark. Officers scrambled as warning klaxons blared. Vox operators screamed into their receivers. "Breach in Bastion 6. Enemy armor pushing through." The Lord General cursed and turned to his commanders. "Rally the 22nd Cadia. Get the Baneblades into position. Move." As the camp erupted into motion, the general hesitated, just long enough to glance at Kratos again. "Do you fight for us?" he asked, voice roughened by desperation. Kratos answered simply, "I fight to end this." It was enough. Soldiers cleared a path to the breach line, though many could not resist stealing glances at him, whispers spreading like sparks along dry tinder. A feeling surged through the air, uncertain at first, then growing into something sharper. Hope mixed with dread. Expectation born from desperation. When Kratos approached the shattered bulwark, the battlefield beyond revealed its true carnage. Mechanized traitor legions pressing forward with tanks scrawled in blood runes, demonic artillery lobbing shells that warped flesh on impact, and infantry pouring through the ruins with fanatical bloodlust. Imperial squads fought in scattered pockets, outnumbered and outmatched. Kratos leapt from the breach, landing amidst the enemy advance with a thunderous crash. Traitor soldiers staggered. He seized the first by the throat, crushing spine and armor in one motion. Bolter fire rained towards him, but he moved faster than their aim, closing the gap and ripping through lines with controlled savagery. The ground shook beneath each blow. Behind him, the Imperial defenders faltered only a moment before rallying. The officer nearest the breach cried out, "He's breaking their line. Push forward." The troops surged, emboldened by what they witnessed. Kratos' presence did not merely kill the enemy. It unshackled something within the soldiers themselves. Fear twisted into resolve. Despair hardened into defiance. Above, a traitor dreadnought lumbered toward Kratos, its multi-melter glowing hot. It bellowed a metallic curse, hydraulic limbs screeching. Kratos rolled beneath the beam of destruction, grabbed a length of broken plating, and hurled it with pulverizing force. The slab smashed into the dreadnought's head, staggering the massive war machine. Before it could recover, Kratos leapt onto its chassis and tore open its sarcophagus, dragging the mutated pilot free and smashing him against the ruined earth. A cheer erupted from the Imperial line. Even the Lord General watched in awe. "Emperor, he's turning the tide alone." But the Inquisitor shook his head. "Not alone. They follow him." And it was true. Wherever Kratos moved, the line surged behind him. Officers adjusted formations instinctively, matching his momentum. Vox channels echoed with frantic updates, units repositioning, artillery redirecting, regiments converging around an axis that Kratos had unknowingly become. By the time the traitor forces began their retreat, the warfront had transformed. A broken, desperate army had become a spear thrust deep into corruption. Kratos stood amidst the wreckage, breath steady, gaze lifted toward the horizon. Behind him, thousands of soldiers paused, not cheering, not shouting, but staring, waiting. The Lord General approached slowly. "I've commanded armies for 30 years, he said. "Never have I seen men rally so fiercely around a single warrior. Whether you will it or not, they look to you. Kratos did not respond at first. The wind carried the lingering scent of blood and burning armor. Yet within it, he sensed another presence. The same cold watcher from before. Not speaking, simply observing. They seek strength, Kratos said finally, not a leader. The general shook his head. Strength becomes leadership in war. The Inquisitor stepped closer, his voice low and absolute. The galaxy is shifting around you, Kratos. Today you led without command. Soon, soldiers will follow you without hesitation. Kratos looked out across the plains where victory still smoldered. He had not come to lead. Yet the path ahead, shaped by the Emperor's silent will and the warp's hungry gaze, narrowed toward one truth. Whether he wished it or not, war had already begun to shape him into something more than a solitary warrior, something the Imperium had not seen in 10,000 years, a Warmaster waiting to be forged. The victory at Vortak's Gate rippled through the crusade like a shockwave, whispered from trench to trench, fleet to fleet. Soldiers spoke of a warrior who fought like a living god. Officers redrew maps with newfound ambition, and even the stoic custodians exchanged quiet words acknowledging the weight of what had begun. Yet Kratos felt none of their fervor. He stood apart as the army reorganized around him, his thoughts fixed on the shifting tension in the air, the unmistakable tremor of the warp watching, waiting, adjusting its designs to his presence. The war front pressed onward across ravaged continents until it reached the ancient valley known as Black Hollow. Once a mining gorge carved into the planet's mantle, it now festered beneath a pool of unnatural fog, its depths twisted into a fortress of corrupted rock and bleeding metal. From the cliffs above, the Crusade commanders surveyed the abyss where the traitor warband had entrenched itself. Warp fires flickered like dying suns within the labyrinth of ruined structures. Demonic silhouettes prowled among rusted spires. And at the center, a colossal citadel pulsed with a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. That is where the enemy commands their rituals, the Lord General said, pointing toward the citadel's core. If we cannot break it, this world will fall. Kratos stood beside him, gaze fixed on the living fortress below. The presence he had felt since Scalathrax stirred again, thin as breath yet sharp as a blade. It whispered not in words, but in sensation, anticipation, hunger, challenge. The citadel did not call to him like the forge had. It waited. The Inquisitor approached, cloak whipping in the bitter wind. The structure is partially real, partially warp-made. Any assault risks tearing open a breach large enough for demons to surge through uncontested. His synthetic eyes focused on Kratos. But it reacts to you. The warp bends when you exert your will. That gives us a chance. Kratos did not answer. His gaze remained locked on the citadel's pulsing veins of crimson light. Preparations for the assault began at once. Regiments of Cadians secured the high ground. Krieg engineers fortified artillery nests along the ridge, and Katishan scouts advanced into the fog with weapons coated in anti-demonic resin. Titans moved into position, their footfalls cracking the stone beneath them. Priests sang invocations over long lines of kneeling soldiers, while banners whipped violently in the storm winds. Kratos walked among them, not as commander or icon, but as shadow, silent, steady, noticed by every eye and respected by hands calloused through endless war. Troopers paused as he passed, their murmurs carried like sparks through oiled machinery. He did not speak, but his presence hardened their resolve in ways no sermon could. When the bombardment finally began, the ground shook as though the planet itself tried to flee. Barrages of plasma, laser fire, and explosive shells rained into the hollow, tearing apart corrupted structures and shattering demon-fused rock. Yet the fortress endured, reshaping itself amid the devastation. Where walls fell, new ones sprouted like bone from open wounds. Where trenches collapsed, demons rose from the churning earth, shrieking at the sky. The order came. Advance. Regiments poured into the hollow, their cries swallowed by the fog. Kratos descended with the first wave, leaping into the valley with a thundering impact. The air here felt wrong, thick, shifting, tugging at consciousness with unseen claws. He sensed the minds of the soldiers behind him waver, their confidence eroding beneath the oppressive presence woven into the very dust. Demons emerged from the mist, their forms unstable, crafted from the screaming fragments of the warp. Kratos tore into them with ruthless precision, each strike unraveling bodies that dissolved into shrieking vapor. Yet the more he fought, the more the fog pressed inward, as though the hollow itself recognized him. Through the murk, a towering silhouette surged toward him, a demon engine stitched from broken tanks and fused corpses, its maw dripping molten bile. Kratos met his charge, driving his shoulder against its rusted plating. The impact cracked the metal. The beast roared, swinging serrated limbs that carved scars into the ground. Kratos seized one limb, snapped it free, and used it to impale the engine's core. It collapsed with a metallic shriek, the howling of its trapped souls echoing faintly as they were released. The soldiers behind him advanced with renewed momentum, rallying around the path Kratos carved. Officers shouted for squads to push forward, and armored columns rolled into the hollow's fractured depths. Yet the citadel loomed larger with each step, pulsing faster now, as though it sensed the encroaching threat. Kratos reached the ruined outer walls first. The stone-like material rippled at his touch, reacting as if alive. For a moment the warp presence surged again, stronger than before, coiling around his mind with serpentine intent. "You walk toward a fate not yours," it murmured, though not in words. "Turn away, and you may yet remain untouched." Kratos growled, forcing the presence back through sheer force of will. The walls shuddered in resistance. A blast tore through the fog as Imperial units breached another section of the hollow. Kratos pressed into the citadel's interior, where the temperature dropped sharply. The floor writhed beneath him, shifting between solid stone and pulsating flesh. As he advanced through a twisted corridor, the screams of the dying reverberated off warped metal, distorted by unnatural acoustics. When he reached the central chamber, he stopped. The heart of the citadel towered before him, a vault of organic machinery, its surface veined with warp lightning. Suspended above the floor hung a massive crystal-like core, inside which a figure writhed. A chaos sorcerer bound in chains of psychic energy. The sorcerer's eyes snapped open, glowing with swirling madness. "God-killer," he hissed, voice stretched thin by torment and ecstasy. "You walk the path all chosen eventually walk. Even you cannot escape the eye of destiny." Kratos advanced, fist tightening. "I forge my own path." The sorcerer laughed, a sound that cracked and echoed. "No, you forge the weapon that will unmake this Imperium." The chamber trembled violently, warp energy surging. Soldiers cried out behind Kratos as demons poured through ruptured walls. The core pulsed brighter, threatening to explode in raw warp light. Kratos tensed for battle, but the sorcerer whispered one final truth, his voice collapsing into a rasp. "You cannot kill what already owns your fate." The chamber ruptured with a shockwave of warp fire, and Kratos was forced into the crucible that would decide not only the battle, but the nature of the destiny that hunted him. The explosion of warp fire did not throw Kratos backward so much as it swallowed the chamber around him, consuming stone, metal, and flesh in a vortex of spiraling, blinding light. For an instant, the world dissolved into distortion. Shapes unraveling, colors bleeding, time itself stuttering like a dying heartbeat. The ground vanished beneath his feet. Silence flattened everything. Then the whispering began. It seeped through the void like smoke slipping through cracks, coiling around Kratos' thoughts before he could force it back. The sorcerer's voice, stretched thin across collapsing dimensions, clung to the air like the echo of a nightmare refusing to die. Your trial begins, God-killer. The light dimmed. Shadows took shape. Kratos found himself standing not in the citadel's ruined core, but upon a vast plain of broken marble suspended in an endless black sky. Cyclopean pillars, cracked and ancient, rose from the void at impossible angles, and above them, floating like shards of memory, hung visions of his past. Olympus burning, Faye's quiet smile, Atreus laughing beside a fire, Baldur collapsing into his arms, the frost giants frozen in their doom. He snarled, "Illusion." But the air shivered, and from the shifting void stepped a figure draped in tattered robes, its limbs warped by chains of crystalline energy. The Chaos Sorcerer stood before him, no longer bound in the citadel, but here, inside the warp-born realm of trial. His eyes glittered with impossible colors. Your mind resists the warped shape, Kratos. Admirable, but futile. You cannot fight your way free of a truth you refuse to confront. Kratos advanced, the ground cracking beneath each step. I confronted truths long before you drew breath. The sorcerer extended an emaciated hand. The marble plane rippled, and visions sharpened into agonizing clarity. Kratos stood now before the younger version of himself, the ghost of Sparta, pale skin fresh with ash, blades burning with Ares' fury. His younger self snarled like a chained wolf, eyes lit with bloodlust. The sorcerer whispered, "Your past still chains you." The younger Kratos lunged with a roar, blades whipping through the air. Kratos blocked with his forearms, sparks erupting as phantom steel clashed against divine scar tissue. The force drove him back a step. This vision carried weight. It had teeth. The warp had shaped it from memory sharpened into a weapon. Kratos countered with a devastating strike that shattered the illusion's jaw, sending the younger form skidding across the marble. But even as the phantom dissolved, another rose from the void, a towering armored figure carved from gold and shadow. Zeus, no longer flesh, no longer ghost, something worse. His form was sculpted from lightning and stone, the echo of a father Kratos had slain. The warp twisted Zeus's face into a perfect replica of condemnation. "You still fear me," the spectre thundered. Kratos gritted his teeth. "No!" Lightning crashed. The force hurled him across the plain, marble cracking under the impact. Zeus descended with a spear of storm in hand, bringing it down in a strike that would have split a mountain peak. Kratos rolled aside, seized the broken marble, and hurled it at the apparition. The stone shattered against Zeus's form, sending fragments of lightning spiraling outward. The spectre dissolved into crackling mist, but another rose in its place. This time it was Baldur, broken, bleeding, eyes filled with hatred and sorrow. His voice quivered with accusation. "You took my life when you could have let me walk away." Kratos closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The memory still burned. The sorcerer's voice floated through the void. "Every life you claimed binds you. Every sin you carry weighs upon your soul. You believe you are free, but you remain trapped by what you were." Baldur rushed forward, fist swinging with godlike fury. Kratos caught the strike, felt the ghost of the pain that once shattered his ribs. He twisted, forcing Baldur to the ground, pinning him with inexorable strength. But the spectre did not dissolve. It pleaded. "Why did you kill me?" For the first time in this warp-forged nightmare, Kratos hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of memory. "I spared you," he said quietly, until no choice remained. The vision faded like mist beneath sunlight. The marble plane shuddered. Warp energy writhed, pulling the world back into a singular shape. The sorcerer stood once more before Kratos, now towering, empowered by the remnants of every illusion he had conjured. "You deny the truth," he spat. "You deny your destiny. You cannot escape what the warp sees within you. A breaker of gods, a destroyer of empires." Kratos stepped toward him, his voice a controlled growl. "I destroyed my past to protect those I loved. I will destroy your lies for the same reason." The sorcerer screamed, unleashing a torrent of warp fire, tendrils of pure chaos that tore through the plane like serpents. They wrapped around Kratos' arms, his legs, dragging him toward a spiraling vortex rising behind the sorcerer, a warp maw hungry to devour him. The sorcerer laughed triumphantly. "You will break, God-killer. All things break," Kratos roared, pulling against the tendrils with force that made the warp itself tremble. The marble cracked beneath his feet. The serpents writhed, tightening, burning his skin with impossible heat. But Kratos pressed forward, dragging the tendrils with him until he reached the sorcerer and seized his throat. "You mistake me," Kratos growled. "I do not break." He squeezed. The sorcerer's body convulsed, warp energy spilling like blood. The vortex behind them shrieked, collapsing in on itself. The illusions dissolved. The marble plane fractured into light, and the warp shattered. Kratos fell through darkness. When he opened his eyes, he was lying amid the ruins of the citadel's core. The sorcerer's corpse crumpled beside him, its body twisted beyond recognition. Imperial soldiers surrounded the chamber, stunned, silent. The Inquisitor approached with slow, measured steps. "You survived," he whispered. "The warp tried to unmake you, and you returned whole." Kratos rose, breath steady. The remnants of warp whispers fading like smoke burned away by flame. "I returned," he said, "because I chose to." The Inquisitor stared, realization dawning like a storm. "This was no mere battle. It was a trial," he murmured. "A test of your will." Kratos looked toward the shattered horizon. "And the test," he said, "is far from over." The citadel's collapse echoed long after its stones stopped falling. Dust drifted through the hollowed chamber like the remnants of a dying dream, and soldiers moved through the ruin with slow, reverent caution, as though afraid the world might shatter again beneath their boots. Kratos stood at the center of it all, the corpse of the sorcerer cooling beside him, the air still trembling with the faint residue of warp energy. The Imperials kept their distance, not from fear alone, but from the weight that clung to him, the unmistakable aura of a man who had faced the immaterial and returned unchanged. The Inquisitor approached first, his synthetic eyes dimmed to a contemplative glow. "The warp sought to break you," he said quietly. "Instead, you broke it." His gaze lowered to the shattered floor. "Do you understand what that means?" Kratos said nothing. Understanding did not demand words. It unfolded in the silence between heartbeats. The warp had tested him, as the gods once had, and found his will unyielding. Yet its touch lingered. Not corruption, but awareness. It would return. It would watch. It would plot. But it had not claimed him. The Lord General entered next, flanked by officers whose armor bore fresh scars from the assault. His expression, though gaunt with exhaustion, held a glint not of fear, but of decision. "The hollow is ours," he said, "and the enemy retreats across the continent. But this victory did not come from strategy or firepower. It came because the men saw you fight." His voice lowered. "They rallied behind you as though born to follow." Kratos turned to face the shattered horizon visible through the ruined walls. Fires smouldered across the valley. Titans limped back toward their repair yards. Lines of guardsmen trudged through mud thick with ash, too weary to cheer, too hardened to collapse. Victory here was not triumph. It was survival bought with blood. "You saw what became of the sorcerer's mind," the Inquisitor continued, stepping beside the general. "You saw the forces gathering beyond the veil. They mount for a greater push. The Imperium bleeds. If humanity falls here, at the edges of forgotten war zones, then terror itself will one day be swallowed." Kratos watched a column of wounded carried down the slope, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. Their faith held them upright, but faith did not shield them. Faith did not lift the dying. Faith did not strike down the horrors that crawled from the warp. "I fought because I chose to," Kratos said, "but I am no commander." The general's laugh was low, bitter. "You already are. Command is not granted by rank. It is earned by those who stand when others fall. Soldiers followed you today without order. That cannot be undone." The Inquisitor studied Kratos' silence, then took a slow breath. "You survived judgment before the High Lords. You stood beneath the Emperor's gaze. You have resisted the warp's temptation. But the Imperium does not merely need strength. It needs unity, purpose, a leader forged from war, but not consumed by it." Kratos turned sharply, his voice edged with iron. "I have been a weapon of gods. I will not become a weapon of men." "No," the Inquisitor replied. "You will not. The Emperor does not demand obedience. He demands sacrifice for humanity's survival. That is a purpose larger than any throne." A tremor shook the ground. Artillery rumbled in the distance. The war, relentless and unending, did not pause long enough for contemplation. Officers rushed forward with updated battle reports. Vox units blared frantic transmissions. A massive counter-assault was coming, within hours. "The Lord," General cursed under his breath. "Our legions are in disarray. Regiments are mixed, command structures fractured. We cannot withstand another coordinated traitor push without reorganizing." Kratos looked over the valley again. Soldiers from a dozen worlds moved through the debris. Their banners hung torn. Their officers barked conflicting orders. Cohesion was broken. Fear simmered beneath exhausted obedience. He stepped forward, not by decision, but by instinct, an instinct honed through lifetimes of war. "Bring them to me." The general hesitated. "All of them?" "All who will fight." The summons went out. Within the hour, 3,000 guardsmen formed ranks across the broken valley floor. More arrived with each passing moment, trudging from trench lines, from medici tents, from the smouldering ruins of the citadel. Even soldiers too wounded to stand crawled forward to witness what was unfolding. The sky burned crimson as warp storm clouds churned above. Thunder rolled across the cliffs like the growl of an ancient predator. Kratos stood before the assembled soldiers. No pulpit, no banner, no proclamation from the High Lords. Only a scarred warrior whose presence cut through the din of despair. "You have fought with courage," he said, his voice carrying through the valley like a drumbeat. "You have faced monsters born from hatred and fire. You have bled for a world that may never know your names." He paced before them, gaze unyielding. "But you are scattered. broken, fighting alone. The soldiers lowered their heads, not in shame, but in recognition. Kratos continued, "War is not won by strength alone. It is won when strength is forged into unity. You are not dying fragments of distant worlds. You are one army, one legion." They straightened, listening with breath held tight. "I will fight beside you," Kratos said. "Not as a god, not as a commander set above you, but as a warrior who knows the weight of battle and the cost of failure." A murmur rippled through the ranks, soft at first, then rising like a tide. The Inquisitor watched with quiet satisfaction. The Lord General nodded, understanding what was taking shape. Kratos raised his voice. "From this moment, your scattered regiments become a single force. Your banners no longer divide you. You will fight as one, bound not by decree, but by survival." Silence fell. Then a lone soldier lifted his rifle in salute. Another followed, and another. Within seconds, thousands of weapons rose into the air. A forest of steel pointed toward the storming sky. Kratos did not smile, but something within him settled. Heavy, resolute. The legions were reforged, not by command, by choice. And far above, somewhere beyond the reach of mortal eyes, the warp shuddered with unease. The reforged legions moved with new purpose across the scarred plains, their formations tighter, their spirits sharpened by the unity Kratos had carved from ruin. Word traveled swiftly through the crusade fleets. A warrior beyond mortal measure had taken the shattered remnants of a failing campaign and forged them into a spear aimed at the heart of chaos. Commanders who once doubted now rushed to align their strategies with his advance, and even distant battle groups adjusted their deployments to match the momentum he created. Yet amid this rising tide of hope, Kratos felt a quiet unease curling through the air like smoke, an unseen pressure building at the edges of perception. The Inquisitor sensed it as well. As dusk fell over the valley, he approached Kratos near the remains of a shattered bastion, his cloak fluttering in the cold wind. "Our victory has stirred the warp," he said. "Demonic incursions spike across the sector. Something reacts to your presence." Kratos did not look away from the horizon, where the storm clouds churned with an unnatural glow. "Let it come." The Inquisitor's mechanical eyes flickered. "You misunderstand. It is not simply coming. It is preparing." Before Kratos could ask what he meant, a Vox officer rushed toward them, breath ragged. "A message from the fleet, Lord," Priority read. A massive warp tear forming near the Oathbound corridor. Entire battle groups reporting destabilization. The Inquisitor stiffened. "The crossroads," Kratos turned. "What is it?" "A convergence point," the Inquisitor replied. "A place where warp lanes twist together like strands of a noose. If Chaos holds it, they control the movement of every Imperial vessel in this subsector. Lose the crossroads, and the Crusade is trapped." A second officer arrived, voice trembling. "The 22nd Cadia is already there. They're being overwhelmed. Their commanders request aid. They say they'll hold as long as possible." Kratos understood before the Inquisitor spoke. "We go." The fleet mobilized with desperate urgency. Stormbirds and gunships roared into the night sky, their engines blazing as they ascended toward orbit. Kras boarded the lead vessel with custodians at his side, their presence no longer an escort, but a protective cordon around a figure whose survival had become strategically vital. As the Stormbird launched, the world below shrank, and the cold dark of space enveloped them. The void beyond the planet was far from silent. Warp fissures flickered like open wounds in reality, their edges leaking violet flame. Imperial ships formed a defensive phalanx around the crossroads. a region of space where luminous warp currents spiraled in colossal arcs, creating a lattice of glowing veins that pulsed like a living heart. And at its center, a massive tear writhed, expanding with each breath of the Imperium. Through its shifting surface, shapes pressed. Claws, wings, fragmented visages of demon princes hungry for release. Kratos stood at the viewing port, fist tightening as he felt the oppressive force radiating from the breach. The warp's malignant gaze returned, more focused than ever. It whispered, "You approach the threshold where destinies twist, step through, and fate unravels." He ignored it. The Stormbird docked with the command cruiser Unyielding Blade, where officers scrambled to coordinate failing defense lines. Alarms blared across the bridge as the ship shuddered from demon-infested torpedoes impacting its armored hull. The Lord Admiral turned toward Kratos with grim resolve. "We've deployed every ship we can. It's not enough. The traitor fleet spearheaded by the Sons of Hate broke through our western flank, and..." His voice faltered. "The Cadians have fallen back to the inner ring. Their commander, your officer from Skalathrax, has gone dark." Kratos stepped forward. "Show me." A hololithic display flickered, revealing the crossroads. A chaotic dance of starships, debris, and warp tornadoes swirling between them. At the center, the Cadian line collapsed, retreating toward a crippled battle barge teetering near the tear's edge. Kratos recognized the officer's sigil among the survivors' transponders. "I go to them," Kratos said. The Admiral blinked. "Direct insertion. That zone is unstable beyond reason. Teleporters will..." But a custodian intervened. "We will ensure his passage." Moments later, Kratos stood within a teleportarium chamber, warp-suppressing pylons growling as they strained against the crossroads influence. Custodians formed a protective circle. The air vibrated violently, reality fraying. The Inquisitor entered, his tone grave. "Be wary. The warp adapts. The more you resist it, the more insidious its tactics become." Kratos gave no answer. The teleportarium flared, bathing everything in blinding white. When vision returned, Kratos stood on a fractured platform of voidstone, floating debris from a shattered vessel. All around him, the crossroads twisted into a nightmare tapestry. Starships flickered between states of matter. Demonic creatures swam through the vacuum as though it were water, and distant screams echoed from directions that did not exist. The Cadian survivors fought desperately across the debris field, firing laser guns into swarms of warp-spawned horrors. Kratos leapt from stone to drifting wreckage, closing the distance with inhuman speed. A demon lunged, jaws distending wide enough to swallow a man whole. But Kratos caught its skull and crushed it into nothingness. Soldiers rallied at the sight of him, forming a defensive arc. "He's here," one shouted. "Fall back to the conduit." But before Kratos could reach the officer he sought, the void shifted. A wave of warp light rolled across the crossroads like a ripple across water. Debris twisted, gravity inverted, screams rose, and from the heart of the tear emerged a figure clad not in demonic flesh, but in armor, imperial in design, yet corrupted by tendrils of scarlet energy. A traitor commander, one Kratos recognized not by name, but by presence. The sorcerer's warning echoed in memory. "You cannot kill what already owns your fate." The traitor removed his helm, revealing a face burned by warp scars, eyes glowing with malevolent purpose. "I have waited for you, God-killer," the traitor murmured. "Your arrival has set the warp aflame with possibility. And now..." He raised his hand, warp fire spiraling around his fingers. "It is time for your first betrayal." Kratos stepped forward, muscles coiling, but the void beneath him cracked. One of the custodians, teleported nearby, shouted a warning too late as warp tendrils seized Kratos' ankles and dragged him across the void stone. The traitor laughed, heralding the trap unfolding. Behind Kratos, something vast began pulling itself from the tear, something wearing his own silhouette, twisted and wrong. A mirror forged from the warp. The betrayal was not of allies. It was the warp's betrayal of reality itself, and Kratos was its chosen fulcrum. The mirrored figure that emerged from the warp tear was neither entirely corporeal nor wholly spectral. It carried the weight of Kratos' own fury, sculpted by a malign intelligence that twisted his memories into a weapon. Every scar, every death, every decision he had ever made was reflected back at him, sharpened to a blade of accusation. It raised its hands, veins glowing with warp light, and spoke in a voice that carried his own cadence, yet laced with the hissing undertone of chaos. You cannot lead. You are already fractured. Kratos roared, charging forward across the floating debris of the crossroads. Gravity twisted. Platforms collapsed beneath his weight, but he moved with the precision of inevitability. Each leap, each strike, tore the air with a ferocity that even the warp seemed to flinch from. The mirrored figure met him mid-stride, blades of pure energy forming from its hands. Their clash erupted with a soundless shockwave that sent shards of wreckage spinning outward. Kratos felt the counterforce of his own rage and history rebound against him, but he did not falter. Every strike he delivered was not only physical, but symbolic, shattering the reflection of every doubt that the warp had cultivated within him. Behind him, Imperial soldiers surged forward, bolstered by the momentum he had created. The Cadians, Kratos' reforged legions, now fought with precision born of inspired purpose. Bolter fire hammered the edges of the warp-fused void, blasting demons and corrupted marines alike, but none dared approach the god-killer directly. The soldiers' faith was no longer simple obedience. It had become a living force, entwined with the will of the Spartan whose fury shaped their every move. The mirrored Kratos struck again, faster, each blow a reflection of every rage-fueled act from past worlds. But Kratos met it with equal force. He twisted his arm, seizing the energy blade and ripping it free from the illusion. Sparks of warp energy hissed as they collided with his skin, yet he pressed on, undeterred. He moved with the certainty of one who had carved his own fate from blood and fire. Every strike he delivered shattered another fragment of the mirrored horror, yet the figure reformed, relentless, as though mocking his attempts to end it. Then the traitor commander stepped forward, standing at the edge of the tear, his form bathed in the blood-red light of the warp. Do you see, God-killer? Every step you take bends the fabric of reality, and yet you cannot control it. Your allies falter. Your legions are scattered. You will fall here, and the Imperium with you. Kratos turned his gaze upon the figure, his eyes burning with the intensity of 100 battles. I have walked through realms where gods fell and monsters rose from the ashes. I have stood against fate itself. I do not fall. The roar that followed was not just a sound, but a proclamation, vibrating through the void, shattering tendrils of warp energy that sought to anchor him. The mirrored figure staggered, flickering as the raw force of Kratos' defiance surged outward, reshaping the battlefield. He leapt toward the traitor commander, his presence alone reshaping the soldier's courage into a tangible wave of momentum. Bolters roared, plasma spat fire, titans lumbered through the fractured void, but all of it was secondary to the force moving with Kratos. a singular purpose born of relentless will. He struck the commander's helm with the force of a mountain, tearing through ceramite and augmetic reinforcement. The warp energy surrounding the man cracked and splintered under the assault, unraveling the spell that had bound the crossroads to chaos. The mirrored figure shrieked, its form splitting and warping violently. Kratos moved through it with ruthless precision, severing limb from limb until only fragments of the twisted self remained. Warp light flickered and collapsed inward, as though the universe itself struggled to restore the anomaly. Kratos stood at the center, breathing heavily, the debris-strewn crossroads stretching endlessly around him. The enemy's push had faltered. The tear, though still present, now recoiled, as if acknowledging the authority of the mortal who had faced its deception. He turned to the soldiers arrayed behind him. They were battered, exhausted, yet their eyes gleamed with a new understanding. Here was a warrior who did not merely fight, but transformed the battlefield by his presence alone. The legions were no longer scattered remnants. They were unified, their fear replaced with purpose. The traitor commander's shattered form writhed one final time, a scream piercing through the warp-touched void, and then silence. The mirrored Kratos's fragments dissipated, leaving only echoes that whispered of every past failure and doubt. Kratos clenched his fists, sensing the residual presence of the warp recoil, retreating for now, yet patient. It would test him again. Always. A custodian approached, hand resting briefly upon Kratos' shoulder. "You have turned the tide, yet there is more to come," he said. The voice was quiet, reverent. "The Imperium will need you beyond any mortal measure." Kratos looked toward the torn skies, the crossroads slowly stabilizing as Imperial engineers and sorcerers began to reinforce the fractured space. "I fight not for glory," he said, voice steady, resonant. "I fight because it must be done." The Inquisitor, standing slightly behind the custodian, inclined his head. "And yet," he said softly, "you have become more than a fighter. You are a fulcrum upon which the fate of humanity may pivot. Today, you did not merely repel the enemy, you became a symbol of strength." Kratos did not answer. He surveyed the field, the shattered ships, the injured soldiers, the wounded titans. His gaze lingered on the distant tear, still pulsing faintly with the hunger of the warp, a reminder that the battle was far from over. A distant roar carried across the void, the echo of enemy forces rallying in shadows, but the soldiers behind Kratos held their ground. They had witnessed not only survival, but the unwavering will that guided it. Even in the face of overwhelming chaos, they would not falter. And at the center of that resolve stood Kratos, a god-killer shaped by countless wars, tempered by the Emperor's silent will, and now poised to lead where few mortals could tread. The storm of battle was not yet ended. The warp remained, patient, unyielding, and hungry. Yet Kratos had made his stand. His fists were still clenched, his gaze still burned, and the crossroads, the convergence of all things, trembled beneath the force of one man's defiance. The path forward was clear, yet fraught with peril, and far beyond the void, countless worlds waited for the reckoning he was destined to deliver. The return to Terra was not triumphant. The legions carried the scent of war, their banners tattered, their armor dented, and their faces etched with exhaustion that no victory could erase. Kratos stood at the forefront of the assembled soldiers, silent amid the tumult, feeling the weight of every life lost, every scar earned, every choice that had carried him from other world into the Imperium. The Emperor's silent gaze lingered, vast and unyielding, reaching through the warp to touch him even from the golden throne. It did not command. It measured, weighing purpose against potential, will against destiny. The halls of the imperial palace loomed above like the ribs of a godless cathedral. Marble columns etched with centuries of war, prayers, and the sacrifices of millions. Every surface pulsed faintly with psychic resonance, the machinery entwined with devotion, devotion entwined with the living will of a ruler who had long ceased to speak. Kratos moved with measured steps, the custodians at his side, the Inquisitor behind, and the warriors of countless worlds following. They did not speak. Their silence bore respect, awe, and recognition of the role he had assumed, not yet named, not yet sanctioned, but inevitable. Before the golden throne, the air itself seemed to bend, heavy with the hum of the machinery sustaining the Emperor's mortal shell. Thousands of souls murmured through the warp, prayers carried across time and space, feeding into the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Kratos' gaze lifted to the vast, motionless form upon the throne, surrounded by conduits, augmetics, and the undying hum of psionic energy. It was the same silent presence that had tested him, measured him, and found him capable. The Inquisitor stepped forward, voice low. You have walked through war, through betrayal, through the very fabric of the warp itself. You have survived where others would have been consumed. The Emperor has not commanded your destruction, yet he has chosen to test you at every turn. You now stand before him. The Imperium waits, and the galaxy watches. Kratos did not kneel. He did not speak immediately. He studied the throne, felt the weight of eternity pressing down, and in that stillness understood the magnitude of the moment. The trials had not been mere tests of strength. They had been revelations. Every step through the crossroads, every battle against demons, every confrontation with his own shadow had forged not just a warrior, but a fulcrum for the fate of humanity. The custodians bowed their heads in quiet acknowledgement. The Inquisitor's eyes glimmered with unspoken meaning. Kratos took a slow breath, drawing in the weight of the palace, the prayers of the Imperium, the residue of countless wars, and the silent expectation of the Emperor himself. Then he spoke. I have walked through worlds of gods and monsters. I have fought to survive, to protect, to forge a path through blood and fire. I will not bow in fear, for fear has no place here. I will stand as I have always stood, as a warrior, as a protector, and if fate demands it, as a harbinger of what must be done. A subtle pulse rippled through the throne. Not movement, not speech, but recognition. The Emperor's presence pressed, measured, immense, and within it, Kratos sensed the approval that needed no words. The galaxy's heartbeat aligned faintly with his own, a quiet acknowledgement of one who had proven worthy to bear the weight of war without losing the will to act. The Inquisitor stepped closer. The Imperium is fracturing at countless fronts. Forces of chaos stir, demons rise, and traitors conspire in every sector. Your presence is more than symbolic. You are now a beacon, a Warmaster whose strength can shape the tide. Your oath, spoken or unspoken, will ripple across every battlefield. Kratos lowered his gaze, considering the enormity of the responsibility. The soldiers behind him, battle-worn yet unwavering, awaited the direction that only he could provide. He did not hesitate. I accept this burden, he said, voice steady, imbued with the weight of history, fury, and resolve. I do not claim it for power, for glory, or for dominion. I claim it to preserve what can still be saved, to strike down those who would rend the galaxy in the name of chaos, to lead with the same relentless purpose that has guided me through every trial. A low hum emanated from the throne, as if the Emperor himself acknowledged the promise. A silent nod of alignment between mortal will and eternal purpose. The custodian stiffened, sensing a subtle shift in the psychic resonance that pervaded the palace. The Inquisitor's eyes glimmered with cautious awe. Kratos had not merely survived the trials. He had emerged as a force capable of shaping the Imperium's future. Yet even as he stood before the throne, a vision flickered briefly at the edge of his consciousness. Distant worlds aflame, legions still fractured, the whispers of the warp serpent lurking beyond perception, patient and calculating. The war was far from over. The enemies of humanity would not pause, and neither would the burdens that now rested upon his shoulders. Kratos straightened, fists clenched. The custodian stepped back. The Inquisitor lowered his head in acknowledgement, and the soldiers behind him shifted with the collective understanding that their purpose was now tied inexorably to the warrior before them. He did not bow. He did not kneel. But in that stance, unwavering and resolute, he swore an oath deeper than words, stronger than law, binding his will to the survival of a galaxy teetering on the brink of annihilation. The throne remained silent, eternal and immovable, yet within its gaze, Kratos felt the final measure. The Imperium had accepted him, not as a servant, not as a tool, but as a warrior who would bear its burdens and shape its destiny. He had become more than a god-killer. He had become its Warmaster. And as the golden halls of terror shivered with the silent prayers of a billion souls, the distant, waiting presence of the warp whispered once more. It would test him again. It would not relent. Yet Kratos' voice carried through the shadowed corridors, firm, unwavering, and absolute. I am ready. And for the first time since his arrival, the galaxy knew that a new reckoning had begun.